Jacob had been away for a year, working in several countries across Europe, trying to build a future for himself. He had spent the time away not just working, but also reflecting on his goals, relationships, and what kind of person he wanted to become. He missed Casey deeply, his girlfriend, who had always been supportive of his dreams. They had been together for several years before he left, and she had always believed in him, in spite of his struggles. Casey, on the other hand, had just landed a significant job at a prestigious company in Europe, a dream role that she had worked so hard for. She was excited to be starting her new chapter, to prove herself in the corporate world. But in her new success, something had shifted within her. Perhaps it was the newfound confidence, or maybe the influence of her colleagues and extended family, but she began to see herself in a different light. Her pride in landing the job began to take on an edge of superiority. When Jacob returned, he was eager to see Casey and reconnect after a long separation. He had been planning to surprise her with a visit to her new office. But what he found waiting for him was not the warm reunion he had imagined. It happened when Jacob showed up at the company event where Casey was attending with her family. He had brought some personal items, boxes filled with things he had brought back from his travels. As he entered the venue, he spotted Casey and her family standing by the entrance. Jacob smiled, thinking this would be the perfect moment to show Casey how much he had changed, how far he had come since leaving. But as he approached, he was met with coldness. Casey's face hardened as she looked at him. Her eyes scanned him from head to toe, lingering on the boxes he carried. "Jacob," she said, her voice sharp, "what are you doing here?" Her words were biting, and Jacob, confused by her cold demeanor, responded, "I came to see you. I thought we could catch up. I've missed you." Casey's family, standing beside her, immediately joined in with their insults. Her uncle, a successful businessman, snorted. "What's this, Jacob? Still carrying boxes around? You never were the type to make it big." Casey's eyes flickered with a mix of disgust and impatience. She crossed her arms. "I can't believe you're here. Don't you realize how embarrassing this is? I've worked so hard to get where I am, and you're still the same. Still a failure." Jacob's heart sank, the sting of her words cutting deeper than he expected. "Casey," he said quietly, trying to keep his voice steady, "you got this job because of me. I helped you. I encouraged you to apply, helped you with your resume, your interview prep. You wouldn't even be here without my support." Casey scoffed, her face flushing with anger. You think you had something to do with this? I earned this position on my own. You don't get it, do you? I'm finally someone. I don't need you anymore. I don't need someone who's stuck in the past, struggling while I'm building my future. The words hit Jacob like a slap. He felt a rush of frustration and hurt, but he didn't let it show. "If that's how you feel, then maybe it's time we end things here," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "You'll see who I really am soon enough." The next morning, Jacob was still reeling from the confrontation. He had already decided that he would no longer chase after a relationship where his worth was measured by superficial standards. He would move on, focusing on what mattered to him: the legacy he was building, his work, and his growth as an individual. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As Casey and her family arrived at the company event, the doors to the grand hall opened, and the guests began to settle into their seats. It was a big day one that was supposed to celebrate the return of the owner of the company from his travels. As they walked through the entrance, Casey and her family froze in their tracks. Jacob, carrying even more items, appeared in front of them, his expression calm yet resolute. Casey's mind was racing. What is Jacob doing here? She thought to herself, did he get a job here? Is he working with me? Her family immediately began to make more comments. Look at him, her uncle sneered, still carrying boxes around. We told you, Casey. This man was nothing but a distraction. You should have left him behind long ago. Casey couldn't help herself. So, you work here now? She asked Jacob, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Carrying things around like a servant. It's a good thing we ended things, Jacob. You clearly don't belong in my world. Jacob's face remained neutral. He didn't respond, just looked at her and turned away. His eyes filled with quiet resolve. Goodbye, Casey. He walked toward the entrance of the Grand Hall, where the event was taking place. Inside, as the guests settled, the moment of surprise arrived. The host stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for this special event. We are honored to welcome back our esteemed company owner, who has just returned from abroad after overseeing new projects and expansions. The lights dimmed slightly as the room fell silent. And now, please welcome, the host continued, Mr. Jacob Matthews. Jacob stepped onto the stage, dressed in a sharp suit, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. He was the owner of the very company that Casey had just joined, the man who had built it from the ground up, the man who had spent years establishing himself as a business tycoon. The room buzzed with whispers of shock and disbelief. Casey, standing at the back with her family, couldn't believe her eyes. The man she had dismissed, the man she had so harshly rejected, was standing in front of her, in control of the very company she had just joined. Her heart sank. She could hear the regret in her own mind, as if every moment of judgment had come crashing down on her. How had she let herself be swayed by arrogance, by the pride of her own success? How had she not seen the man standing before her? Jacob addressed the crowd with a confident smile, his voice calm but strong. I thank you all for your support, and I look forward to the future of this company, as we continue to grow and innovate. As the applause rang out, Casey stood frozen, her mind racing. Her family, too, was stunned by the revelation. They had no idea who Jacob truly was, and now they were left to confront the harsh reality of their misguided judgment. In the weeks that followed, Casey couldn't stop thinking about the man she had turned her back on. She tried to reach out to him, but Jacob remained distant, focused on his work and the future of his company. The life she had envisioned, one built on ambition, status, and superficial success, felt empty without him. She had lost someone who had truly cared for her, someone who had helped her become who she was, all for the sake of pride and arrogance. Jacob, on the other hand, had learned a valuable lesson. He had discovered his own worth, independent of anyone else's validation. He had built something real, something lasting. And while he had once thought that Casey was the one he wanted, he realized that true success wasn't about having someone beside you who only saw you for what you could give them. It was about having the strength to stand alone, knowing who you really were. And so, As Jacob moved forward with his company, he left the past behind, knowing that the lessons he had learned were far more valuable than any relationship success that others could see. The grand event was over. Guests had mingled, speeches had been made, and the buzz of surprise had slowly settled into the background. Jacob had been gracious in his role, the owner of the company, commanding respect and admiration from his colleagues and business partners. But for Casey, the day had taken a sharp turn. The reality of what she had done to Jacob, her misjudgment and rejection, hit her like a wave. She watched him with a sense of disbelief, knowing that she had not only embarrassed herself, but had also lost a person who had meant so much to her. Later that evening, after the event had wrapped up and the crowd had thinned out, Casey found herself standing outside the building, waiting for Jacob. She could feel the weight of the decision she had made the day before, and it gnawed at her heart. Her family had long since left, but she couldn't leave until she spoke to him. She had to make things right, had to apologize for what she'd said and done. When Jacob finally emerged from the building, his suit sharp and his posture confident, Casey's breath caught in her throat. He looked just as he had when they were together, only now he seemed even more distant, more untouchable. She took a step toward him, and he stopped, his gaze meeting hers without any warmth, only the cool indifference that stung her more than anything. Jacob, wait, she said, her voice faltering. I need to talk to you, please. He didn't respond right away. His expression was unreadable, but after a long, tense pause, he finally spoke. I didn't think you'd be here, he said, his voice low. I thought you'd have learned by now that I don't need to explain myself to you anymore. Casey's heart dropped. She had expected anger, maybe even bitterness, but the calmness in his voice struck her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't prepared for how distant he had become. Jacob, her voice cracked as she struggled to find the right words. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was foolish. I judged you without understanding who you really are. I thought I was better than you because of the job, because of everything that's happened. But now I see how wrong I was. Jacob's eyes softened for a moment, but the pity she had hoped for was not there. Instead, he sighed, as if he had heard this all before, but never from someone who truly understood the consequences. Casey, you made your choice, he said, his voice steady but firm. You walked away from me the moment you thought I wasn't good enough. You judged me based on what I didn't have, instead of seeing the person I am. And now, when it's too late, you come here and apologize. Casey felt her heart race, the reality of her mistake crashing down on her. I know, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't see it before, but I see it now. I was selfish. I should have trusted you, believed in us. Please, Jacob, give me a chance to make it right. Jacob shook his head, his expression hardening. No, Casey, I'm done with this. I don't need your apology. I've moved on. And so should you, she blinked, not understanding. Moved on? What do you mean? Jacob's gaze didn't waver. I'm getting married to someone else. The words hit her like a cold wind. What? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you mean you're getting married? I've found someone who appreciates me for who I am, not for what I can give her, he replied, his tone unwavering. Someone who's seen me at my worst and still chooses to be with me. Someone who values the relationship we've built. I'm done waiting for people like you who only want me when it's convenient for you. Casey's eyes filled with tears as she took a step back, Jacob, I never meant to hurt you. I love you. He shook his head, his voice quieter now but resolute. You love who you thought I was, Casey, but you never loved me for who I really am. You loved the idea of me, the man you thought I could be, when in fact, I've always been the man standing right in front of you. And that man doesn't need someone who doubts him, or who doesn't believe in him until it's too late. She wanted to say more, to beg him, to explain herself, but the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. There was nothing left to say. The trust, the connection they once shared, was gone. She had burned that bridge with her own hands. Jacob took one last look at her, his face softening just slightly, but with no regret in his eyes. Goodbye, Casey, and with that, he turned and walked away. Casey stood there in the dimming light, her heart a mix of sorrow, regret, and disbelief. She had lost him, and in doing so, she had lost the one person who had truly understood her, the one person who had supported her before she ever achieved any success. In her desire for status, for outward success, she had overlooked the man who had always been by her side. As she stood in the quiet evening, the realization hit her fully. It wasn't just that she had lost Jacob, it was that she had lost herself. In chasing after a career, after material success, she had forgotten the things that truly mattered: loyalty, trust, and the person who had helped her achieve all of it. And now, all that was left was the hollow echo of her own ambition. Jacob, meanwhile, was already a world away from the woman he had once loved. He had built his future, not around fleeting success or validation from others, but on the foundation of his own strength. And now, he was ready to marry someone who saw him for who he truly was, someone who loved him, not because of his wealth or position, but because of his character, his journey, and his unwavering resolve. He had learned the hard way that love wasn't about finding someone to share your success with. It was about finding someone who would be there for you when you had nothing, and now he had that.